Dr. Price,
Mhm.
how is the Son of Man shrinking?
Ha, ha, ha. We know less and less about him. That's the idea until finally he reaches the vanishing point. As far as anything we can know, it's just surmise based on the application of the critical acids to the figure.
So, what do you mean by we keep knowing less and less about him? Is it like the more scholarship that's being done, the more that's been taken out of the historical Jesus, or what we think we know about the historical Jesus?
Yeah, that is exactly right. Just to give a little coming attraction, you think you know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem and that he was descended from King David. But then, when you take a closer look, it seems to imply that he was born in Bethlehem, but uh, grew up in Nazareth and doesn't have the same ancestry between Luke and Matthew. Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus born in Bethlehem. Where the heck was he born? Was when Jesus baptized in the River Jordan, or is this a kind of stock story? A similar one occurs with the story of Zoroaster, taking a sacred bath in the holy river, coming up, having a vision of an angel that tells him to go do this mission for God, and immediately a devil figure shows up and tries to dissuade him, but he says, "Nah, I'm doing it. You can't stop me." Then he does miracles, but various ancient characters are said to do them, and you better have some good reason for thinking Jesus did if you think they didn't. A lot of them are very similar to Buddhist stories and Pythagoras stories and so forth. You figure, well, Jesus must have gone out into the wilderness to be tempted. Well, of course, he might have. People have done stuff like that, but then again, they're very similar stories where Abraham, Moses, and others go out into the desert and steals their resolve and so forth. So it's like, and more of these things happen. He's crowned king informally. That happens elsewhere as well. He tells parables. Well, needless to say, that's not uncommon. He is put to death on a hilltop, which is a common feature of hero stories. He Nobody knows where exactly he's buried, like several of these stories. He appears alive again. He gives a farewell. He ascends to heaven. He may appear again from there. And of course, oh yeah, miraculous birth. I mentioned that. And um, so there are so many of these things where the simple similarity to all these characters makes you think, well, I don't necessarily think this happened with a historical Oedipus or something. Why should I think this one is true? And then you start looking at all the stories and how they tend to contradict one another in detail, sometimes fatally so. Like, who was it that when the women went to the tomb to anoint the body of Jesus, did they see him? Some gospels say yes, or did they not? Some gospels say which women were there, etc., etc. Don't tell me this story would hold up in a court of law. There's so many radical differences between them, and that's true of so many of these stories. They don't match, and perhaps worse yet, the gospel stories, almost every one of them, are so much like an Old Testament story that, again, you have to ask yourself, now, what's more likely? That, okay, Jesus pulled off an impossible miracle, feeding the multitude with a little bit of food, or that somebody rewrote a famous story where Elisha did the same thing? Well, of course, it's got to be the copying thing. And this kind of critical approach to it doesn't lessen the value of it unless you think the original value was that it was spectacular and true, as if you had seen a Superman or Avengers movie and thought it was true. And afterward, like you were a little kid, and afterward you ask your parents, "Was this true?" And they said, "No." Oh, I mean that's the disappointment believers don't want to experience, but there's plenty in the Gospels. There's great stuff that will change your life and your outlook. It's just that people want that ticket to heaven they think they've got by believing it all literally. But there's less and less, I would say virtually nothing you can be sure about. There might not even have been a historical Jesus, though maybe there was. It's impossible to know now.
And will one of those contradictions be like when Jesus teaches pacifism, like he says in one place that he came to bring peace, but in another place he says actually he came to bring not peace but a sword?
Well, that I don't think is a contradiction, ironically, because in the one place it may be based on a passage from Amos. From now on, a man's enemies will be those of his own household, father in law against daughter in law, and so on and so on. Uh, but then it says, don't think I've come to bring peace, but rather a sword, or in Matthew, division. That looks like someone is making Jesus comment on the sectarian strife that erupted in his wake as it became controversial to be a Christian. And some people said, well, mom, dad, I'm doing it. I'm going to church. And they said, well, if you do, don't darken our door again. And so on. That isn't necessarily talking about actual killing soldiers uh, in a war. We have blessed are the peacemakers, but that, I mean, since that's cheek by jowl with if anybody slaps you in the face, give him the other cheek to slap next. It's like Plato said, you don't want to sink to the level of some brute who brutalizes you. You might want to escape, but if possible, don't become like him. It's hard to be sure Jesus doesn't mean any more than that. And or like in Gethsemane, Peter whips out the sword and says, "We're ready to defend you." Like in the Superstar, "We're going to fight for you, Lord." And Jesus says, "Don't bother. Don't you think I could summon 12 legions, that is thousands of angels, to prevent this? But if I did, how do you think the scripture would be fulfilled that says it has to happen this way?" Well, that's not a statement about the military in general or warfare or the lack of it. He's just saying, no. It's like when they say, Master, did this man sin in order to be blind, or was it his parents that are being punished by this? Jesus doesn't say, "What, are you kidding? God doesn't work that way." He doesn't say that. He doesn't renounce these as possibilities. He just says, well, I happen to know that in this case, it's for the greater glory of God. Same thing. He's not really addressing the issue we're concerned about. So that one, I think, is not really a contradiction. We don't know if Jesus would have been considered a pacifist or not. But how about fasting? There's one where in Mark chapter 2, Jesus is asked, "Why don't your disciples fast? The rest of us pious Jews do." And he says, "Well, look, uh, can you imagine them fasting during a wedding reception when the bride and the groom come in and everybody claps and gives a toast? Oh, of course not. But one day it'll be over, and then there'll be an occasion for fasting, a funeral or something." Yeah, that's a way of saying we're not fasting all the time, but right now is not the time to do it. But then it says nobody puts new wine into old wineskins, right? Because the wine expands as it ferments, as new wine does. And an old wineskin has already held wine that is fermented and enlarged as far as it can. So if you stupidly pour new wine into it, kaboom! You burst the skin and you've lost the wine. That's why nobody does it, right? Well, he's saying by metaphor that the old ways cannot contain the new reality. Basically, the kingdom of God has come. Don't you see it? We're not going to fast and mourn to prepare for it when it's here. If we keep behaving as if it's not here, it won't be here. So, two very different things. In the first case, it says, that we're not fasting at the moment, but we will when it's appropriate. The second one says we're not fasting anymore. There's no point to it any longer. And then, of course, in Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, when you fast, just don't do like the Pharisees do. Well, which is it? We're not going to fast anymore. We're not going to fast at the moment, or we'll fast, but on a different schedule or something. It seems like people didn't have any guidance from Jesus, and different people tried their hand at it. I bet Jesus would say so and so, and somebody who heard that said, oh, Jesus said this? Okay, that settles it. But somebody else heard another guy's opinion, and so you get these clashes between things. Or did he say, blessed are the cheesemakers? Okay, well, there he might have said something, but you got it wrong. So the saying isn't made in a vacuum, but it's inaccurate anyway. And there's so many possibilities for this happening, and so many instances where Jesus seems to be addressing things that we know didn't occur that early in the movement. Like Jesus is talking about persecution. Were they an outlaw sect yet before the crucifixion? No, that seems to be referring to the early church, which the disciples certainly don't. They're not pictured as knowing there's going to be an early church, right? Any more than they know he's going to be crucified and resurrected.
We got a couple of super chat questions. Let's start with Jacob B. Thank you for your super chat. Hey, Dr. Price, how many saviors does it take to be born of a woman? As many as mythographers allow and gullible fools believe them?
Well, yeah, the you might want to say, instead of gullible, hopeful people that just need some hope, and they need to be told that the person whose teaching they hear was super special, so we can trust what he says. Martin Debelius called this the law of biographical analogy. It's not that somebody is pulling one over on you necessarily. It's that people who follow the Buddha or whoever, or Jesus or Moses, there was even a version of that with him, they say it was such a history changing, epic making development when Savior X entered the world. It had to be a special entrance. He must have been begotten by God or an angel or something like that. It seems to be a natural inference in pre-scientific cultures. Now it could be a good excuse, the way we read it with is it Livy that tells this? I don't know, that Romulus and Remus were born of a virgin and suckled by a wolf. And what happened here? Well, their mother, I forget her name now, she was a Vestal virgin. And she became pregnant, which is the last thing you're supposed to do if you're a consecrated virgin. And she said, "Look, it wasn't my fault. The god Mars appeared and impregnated me." Well, then you think of Matthew's version of the Annunciation, right? Mary becomes visibly pregnant during the engagement, And so people are saying, "Oh boy, she was a bad girl," and Joseph wanted to spare her more of this. I'm not sure how this would have done it, but he resolved to break the engagement and send her away privately. Well, that's kind of what people naturally. We don't know if Mary said, "Hey, look, it was the Holy Spirit." It's only when Joseph is assured in a dream that it was that he believes it. But you wonder, in the case of Romulus and Remus, if we're really supposed to believe this is a funny excuse. Who knows? It could be either one. So you could be taking advantage of people's gullibility, or it just could be a kind of childlikeness.
Let's take a look at the next one. Constellation Pegasus, thank you for that big super chat. Concerning the ending of Mark again, why do modern Bibles have the extra verses in them anyway? And why not add all three different ones in the Bible? It throws me for a loss when the NIV version says itself verse 8 may not be the original ending.
I think the issue there is purely financial. They want to sell some Bibles. Somebody put it that way. A parishioner of mine who actually worked for the American Bible Society. Um, well, when they first published the Revised Standard Version of the New Testament in 1945, I think they did have the longer ending of Mark, but in small print in a footnote. And it said this is probably not original to Mark. It doesn't occur in the earliest manuscripts. Whoa, that did not go over well with your conservative Bible reading public who staged book burnings of the RSV because they said, hey, look, the Bible I believe in is the one I was brought up on. And the psychology of this is understandable. Once you start raising doubts in it, you're picking holes in it. And oh, well, what are you going to tell me next not to believe that is in my Bible? And of course, they're right about that. Textual criticism advances, and you find out there's like a page and a half of extra material in the King James once you put it all together. You find out that the translations are not definite. And then they start publishing shelves full of new translations. And if you quote one, it's not necessarily going to match what the other guy quotes. So you can't even use them to have a theological duel between you anymore. And so their confidence in, well, what is the real Bible? I mean, they're hanging on to that Bible like a life preserver. Whether they really need it or not, I don't know. But since they are, they feel extremely uncomfortable when people say, well, you know, there's something a bit wrong about this Bible you trust. And so to try to satisfy more critical readers, Bible publishers tend to include both the longer and the shorter ending, and sometimes even the freer logion, a little added insert or a longer version of the longer ending, and in footnotes or with brackets, and they explain that we don't really think this is part of what Mark wrote. But apparently people got to like these modern language translations so well that that kind of overbalanced their fear of textual criticism, and they probably just pick the ending they want. But the reason they include it all is to mollify those people.
Thank you, Dr. Price. Let's take a look at the next super chat. Constellation Pegasus, thank you for the super chat. I'm a little embarrassed and mad still sometimes being a Jehovah's Witness for so long. I never caught this Mark ending stuff until I started listening to you some 2 years ago. You are truly a gem for those researching.
Well, because I've done so much of it, and it is such a fascinating quest. Kind of lost my belief in the Bible along the way, but unlike some, I would say I came out ahead on the deal. And I'm so glad you're so interested in biblical research. I got to say, with the witnesses, I don't want to vilify them, but they have a lot of guts doing what they do, and their favorite Bible is right in the translation where some are wrong. There are good things to say about them, but there's certainly a kind of, as you say, set of blinders everybody has to put on. I guess everything's a mixed bag.
Let's look at the next one. Jacob B. Thank you for the super chat. Apart from two obvious forgeries in Josephus, myth in the Gospels, hearsay, and fabrication, Paul, who wasn't even in the loop until the last minute, 1 Corinthians 15, there is absolutely nothing about Jesus.
Yeah, nothing worthwhile. Even if Josephus wrote this stuff, which I'm not convinced of, though you can make a case for it, I'm not convinced by it. Or even if Tacitus is referenced to Crestus, the founder of Christianity, even if he actually wrote that, and there's some doubt, that doesn't really help because these guys were not really contemporaries of Jesus. You don't need to posit more than that they heard what Christians believed second or third or fifth hand from or more from Christians in their time. So we don't really know. That's kind of like saying, well, the encyclopedia mentions him. Well, yeah, it does, but you can't trust that. They're just giving you, what most scholars think. But I think you're right. There isn't any real attestation.
It gets me to a question regarding when I was when you were being asked about the longer ending of Mark. Were there additional modifications to the Gospel of Mark other than its ending?
Yeah, I once put together a kind of just totally hypothetical version of proto Mark. The theory is that there was an earlier version of Mark that Matthew and Luke used, or perhaps even an earlier one than that, and that's based partly on verbal agreements between Matthew and Luke where they otherwise agree with Mark. But suddenly here, though Matthew and Luke are using the same sentence word for word, Mark is basically the same, but it's not worded quite that way. Well, did both Matthew and Luke happen to improve the wording in exactly the same way independently? That is a bit of a problem, though not much of one, I think. I think that's probably the result of scribes unwittingly, unconsciously harmonizing manuscript differences because they thought they knew what came next, but they're really reading the text of the other gospel. Okay, now what about these things that were really signs of stuff being added? Luke, well, let me put it this way: Mark has two chains of miracle stories, seven of them. Each has a walking on water and or storm at sea story. Each has um, a miraculous feeding story. Each has Jesus heal the child of a foreigner at a distance, and there's like uh, four more, but that's good enough. They're in slightly different order. Some of them, most of them are the same though. And there's even a third version in the Gospel of John, the so-called signs source, that isn't quite as close, but just about. Well, now, interestingly, Mark has both versions. Apparently, he just, they had varied a bit in the different sources he used and said, oh, I don't know which one's better. I'll just put them both in. Luckily, I'm glad whenever they did that. I want more text, not less. But Luke may have said, I'm adding a lot of material. Maybe I should abridge Mark to make room for mine. And he might have cut out one of the miracle chains. But it's, I'm so sorry, this is such a mess. It might be that Mark didn't originally have one of the miracle sequences, and that by the time Matthew got it, someone had added it. But by the time Luke got it, no one had. And so he didn't have but one of these miracle sequences. Well, on it goes. It's possible that, the transfiguration story was originally a resurrection appearance, and that this is where you're told in First Corinthians that Peter had a resurrection vision of Jesus, but it isn't narrated anywhere in the Gospels. That's very odd. Well, suppose it was, but it was the transfiguration story. We're told in Romans that he was designated Son of God through the resurrection of the dead. Well, here's a story where he's gleaming like the sun, and a heavenly voice declares him the Son of God, and he's just been raised from the dead. Could this be the original story? Was it originally the lost ending of Mark? Who knows? Or the ascension, which only really happens in Luke anyway, in some manuscripts. It's been suggested, I think Bultmann suggested this one, that when it now, that this came at the end of Mark. And once it was put back into the ministry of Jesus, let's see. Yeah, where it says that suddenly the disciples saw only Jesus. Moses and Elijah had vanished, and a cloud received them up. Well, Bultmann suggested that originally Jesus was the one taken up in the cloud, as in Luke. Well, if that was in Mark was significantly edited. There are other ones as well. Boy, oh boy, what I'm not quite remembering offhand. Well, Frank Zindler suggested that the early passages in Mark where Nazareth is mentioned as the location Jesus is from, and John the Baptist is there and the whole thing, that it was a later addition to explain why Jesus, and it explains it incorrectly, as to why Jesus was called the Nazarene, which originally meant the branch or the Holy One or the member of the Nazarene sect. But the guy that added this material to the beginning of Mark didn't understand that it was a sect label, a denominational tag, and he thought it meant a place in all these others, and so he made it a place in that section. The very opening line of Mark, this is the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Isn't it interesting that in a bunch of manuscripts it doesn't have the Son of God? Now, that's a pretty big omission if that's what it was. So did somebody cut it out, or did somebody simply skip it accidentally? There's no way to know, because either would make sense, and the manuscript evidence is not definitive. A bunch of them say this, a bunch of them say that. And there are yet more, but that gives you some idea that it's like the reason they can't decide what's the original often is that there's too little manuscript evidence, or, oh, yeah, let me just get to my favorite, which you've probably heard from me before. I'm very repetitive, where it looks to me like Luke and Matthew were working from an earlier version of Mark that read differently than either of them have. But well, okay. When the high priest asked Jesus, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed?" and in Mark, as we read it, Jesus just forthrightly says, "I am." Well, now, how come in Matthew and Luke, which base the scene on Mark, he doesn't say that? He gives an equivocal answer. You say that I am. What's that supposed to mean? I mean, apologists always say, "Oh, that was an idiom. They that means, oh yeah, you bet." I don't buy that. I just don't think they're right. Um, and in Luke, it's even worse. If I tell you whatever I tell you, you're not going to believe me. What? It seems to me that the answer is that the original reading of Mark was contained in is preserved, I should say, in just a couple of manuscripts, very early ones, where he is asked the question and he says, "You say," not the whole "you say that I am," but the same point. Well, if that's what you were reading, well, that's kind of what Matthew adds. He says, "You say that I am," but he's preserving what would have been in that early version of Mark. Luke's is even more changed, but you can easily imagine a scribe reading along as he's copying Mark, and he gets to where Jesus says, "You say," and he says, "That's not good enough. Wouldn't Jesus give an unambiguous answer?" I mean, if martyrs are supposed to confess their faith uh, loud and clear before their persecutors, would Jesus give an evasive answer? No, of course not. It couldn't have originally read this way. And so he changed it to "I am." But Matthew was still looking at the one that simply said "you say," and so was Luke. But so it seems to me that's, you can make a good case for that, and that Mark probably didn't read quite the way we have it. And there are yet other versions of it, but it certainly is a fascinating investigation.
We got a few more super chats. Let's take a look at this one. Constellation Pegasus, thank you for the super chat. If this Jesus was what the Bible says, it's just strange how evidence for the most important man in history have lacking evidence he existed, and have the text butchered over time the way Jesus was. It's shameful to me.
Well, Jesus is the supernova. He makes such a difference to these people that it's no surprise how, if there was a factual story of Jesus, it would get hidden quickly behind the what I call the stained glass curtain. This happened with St. Francis of Assisi. There are the little flowers of St. Francis, a whole bunch of apocryphal anecdotes about the guy that don't seem to be true, but that do kind of sum up the way people remembered him. Just like there's largely an identifiable character to the Jesus figure in the Gospels. There's some inconsistencies, but even when you find reason to think he didn't actually say the stuff or any of it, you still can describe the nature of this literary character. The miracles, again, think of the Old Testament, the miracles and other stories of David, Joshua, um, Moses, Elijah, Elisha. As D.F. Strauss pointed out, a lot of Jews figured, well, when the Messiah comes, Will he do less than the great heroes of the Bible? No. He'll do more and better. And that by itself would explain how you got all these stories of those Old Testament characters uh, blown up, puffed up into even better feedings of thousands of people, et cetera, et cetera, and so forth. So it's kind of natural in a way. Plus, if there was a downside to Jesus, you can well imagine that would have been suppressed. And we know that there are hints of that even in the Gospels, where Jesus says, You're like kids bickering in the marketplace over what game to play. The boys say to the girls, We played the flute, but you wouldn't dance. And the girls say, Well, what did they do? I forget. And you wouldn't uh, mourn with us. And the reason for that was boys, men danced at weddings, women didn't. And women lamented and cried out at funerals, but men didn't. So the boys and the girls are like playing adults, but they're segregated according to the game they want to play. And Jesus says, that's just what this generation is like. You can't make up your mind. John the Baptist comes and eats and drinks and socializes, and you say, look, this guy's a demoniac. And then the Son of Man comes eating and drinking, and you say, oh boy, a glutton and a drunk. Well, which is it going to be? Right? This guy's too ascetic for you. This guy's too moderated for you. Which is it going to be? Well, that's the beginning. Apparently, they're quoting that some are saying Jesus was a drunk. He shouldn't have associated with those bums. And others saying, oh, Jesus or John the Baptist was a lunatic. Or look in the Gospels where they say, what? Aren't we correct when we say you're a Samaritan, in other words, a heretic, and a demoniac? And Jesus says, I'm no demoniac, and so on and so forth. Or Jesus telling the guy to forget about burying his father, come follow me. Or the thing about the bringing a sword. It's easily possible to understand that in a way that makes Jesus a subversive, or Jesus gets crucified as a subversive. You can see plenty of stuff that could have led to a vilification of Jesus, and Christians would have ignored it or stamped it out, because we hear that there was a fairly early book called the Gospel of Nicodemus, also called the Acts of Pilate, that was suppressed because it didn't show Jesus in a very good light. So it was probably destroyed once Christians were in a position to do that. And then they wrote their own Acts of Pilate, which is just all positive to substitute for it. Boy, I would love to know what the original said. And so it might be that there was real data in there that Christians naturally suppressed.
Let's take a look at the next one. Constellation Pegasus, thank you for the super chat. Last one, possibly, Mr. Price. Who was this Jesus that later on history built as a person bigger than life itself and called the Son of God?
Well, if there was a historical Jesus, um, Robert Eisler, SGF Brandon, and others get my vote, and Hermann Samuel Reimarus, the old deist. All of them said Jesus was properly crucified as a revolutionist. I mean, not that he wanted Jesus to, not that he was glad Jesus got crucified, but he said it wasn't a frame up. He said, look at the different layers of the disciples' comments in the Gospels. It's obvious they expected Jesus to lead them into Jerusalem to take over, to raid the temple, which it says he did, And it says he occupied the temple, which the court of the Gentiles, which is bigger than several football fields put together. He wouldn't allow anybody to bring the sacrificial vessels, because that's what the Greek says, a skelos, a sacrificial vessel. Not just it wouldn't allow he wouldn't allow them to bring stuff back in there. He was interrupting the sacrifices, which is just what they did on the eve of the revolt against Rome. Why was he there? Was he trying to rob the treasury, as others had tried to do, to arm his his men? And there must have been a heck of a lot of them for him to occupy the whole area, right? There are those sayings about not bringing peace but a sword. You can read them that way. There's this astonishing thing at the Last Supper in Luke. Remember when I sent you out preaching and God took care of your every need? You had nothing to worry about. Nobody harmed you. Everybody fed you. Yeah, we remember that, the good old days. And he said, well, things are going to be different now. I'm telling you, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. You're going to need it. And they said, well, here are 2 swords, Lord. And he says, that ought to be enough. How could that be? Well, maybe originally he expected to summon 12 legions of angels, and his disciples were simply to fight with them, like in the war scroll at Qumran. I wouldn't be surprised at all. And what was it the disciples preached as they went through the towns of Israel? Well, given what the Gospels say, what did they believe at the time? That Jesus was going to march into Jerusalem, overthrow the Romans, and the disciples, would be on the dais on either side of him. And Jesus even promises them in Matthew and Luke, I can't decide who's going to be at my right and my left. That's for somebody else to decide, God, presumably. But that you 12 will sit on 12 thrones governing the tribes of Israel. What does that mean? Well, if he wasn't a revolutionist, it probably just means that here are the 12 patriarchs of the church, just like the Dead Sea Scrolls community had 12 leaders, and that they're feathering their nest. But if Jesus really said it to the 12, it sounds like he is saying there's going to be a worldly kingdom, that he will rule and they will rule at his side. And if that's what they thought, without Jesus correcting them, if that's what they thought when he sent out the disciples to preach the coming of the kingdom, that's what he must have been teaching. I mean, can you imagine Jesus sending them out without quizzing them first? Now, here's what I want you to tell people. And if they said something completely distorted, Jesus would say, what? Everybody's going to get a car, as if this were the Oprah show. That flying saucers are coming. Oh, what? Where'd you get that idea? No. I want you to talk about the imminent dawn of the kingdom of God and so on. Surely he would have checked what they thought and what they planned to preach. And Reimarus pointed out all this stuff, and he said, though we have an overlay of later Christian thought, so that it kind of appears Jesus does tell them the advanced stuff here and there, it really is pretty easy to peel that away and ask, what the heck is this radical stuff doing in there? Who would have added that? So I think Reimarus and Eisler and Brandon, if there was a historical Jesus, and there might have been, I think they got him right, that he was a violent religious revolutionist, a would-be Messiah. In fact, I'm really torn between that and pure mythicism.
Russell Shute, thank you for your super chat. Gunnar Heinsohn proves 700 years of bogus history inserted into the first 100 AD. No Jesus monuments in the first 300 years of history. The Gospels be joke.
I don't know what to make of that. He's another guy with radical opinions and an amazing amount of knowledge. And I'm even less familiar with his work to be able to comment on it. Really, I need to look into it more. I was on a show with him, and he's very impressive, but it's much more complex than I can, um, you know, make a judgment on without looking further into
Yeah,
it.
yeah, it was
But I
on
don't
this.
know what would this would mean. It's interesting.
It was on this channel. For those that don't know, I'll put the link in the description when this live
Oh,
stream is
good.
over, so people can go check it out.
Yeah, it's worth looking at, I'm sure.
Yeah, the PowerPoint presentation he showed is definitely very complicated. I'm personally not convinced, but he's a nice guy.
Yeah, and I say let 100 flowers bloom. I want to look at any possibility I can. I'm bound to learn something from it.
Oh, Constellation Pegasus, you've been super chatting a lot today. Thank you for the super chat. Jesus doing all of these big miracles like feeding thousands from 2 fish and loaves of bread makes me think something like this would have got the Roman authorities' attention real fast. No mention of Roman inquiry early on.
So, like, if these rumors were, if reports were getting to them, you got a real point, because think of the Lazarus story, where of course, the Sanhedrinists were not present at the funeral of Lazarus or that feast afterward, but the word got to them. Hey, hear this? Jesus of Nazareth brought this guy back from the dead. And that gets to the Sanhedrin, and they say, "Hey, gents, we got a problem here. If this guy keeps getting popular implicitly from stuff like this, they even keep saying it. Whatever happened, we could be in huge trouble. This is the kind of thing that starts popular revolts, and that's the kind of thing that leads to the Romans crushing the indigenous governments. So we got to do something fast. So I think you have a real good point. What why wasn't there some? In fact, I think Gerd Tyson, in a book called Shadow of the Galilean, where it was like a novel trying to embody what he thought the whole scenario was like. I think he had the Romans send out a spy to follow Jesus and report on him. But I'm not sure. This is so many years ago I read this. I don't know if he thought he had any basis for this or just thought it must have happened. I know, at least back in the Middle Ages, some people thought there was a spy sent to keep an eye on Jesus, a guy named Sergius or Sergei, and they said that it was he who was crucified in Jesus' place and made to look like him. Serves him right. Well, again, I guess that's people thinking just what you're saying. If rumors like this were circulating, wouldn't they try to keep an eye on him? And these two people I mentioned thought that, well, they must have, but we don't know that. But you're saying if they did, wouldn't they have arrested him earlier? And that, I guess, is a good argument against that. Good point.
Let's get to the next super chat. Scroll down for a second here. Hold on. Oh, there it is. Jacob B., thank you for your super chat. Dr. Price, from a devil's advocate point of view, what arguments and evidence would you make in favor of historicity? Anything particular?
Well, actually, if you read all those bits and pieces I just summarized that Reimaris, Eisler, and Brandon highlight, that would count. Because it seems to me that if that was real tradition, you and I find that is kind of that pushes me a little farther in the historical Jesus direction. This what's the word? This schematizing of this evidence seems so plausible to me that I would say this is genuine evidence. Another thing that really is kind of part of this is the so-called Caliphate of James. We're told by, I think, Hegesippus and Eusebius that when after Jesus was gone, his brother James the Just was installed as like the caliph, the leader of the community of believers. I mean, he would have had no civic authority, but he would have been kind of like a pope, I guess. Oh, but very much like the caliphs after the death of Muhammad, right? Abu Bakr, Uthman, Umar, and Ali, and one after the other. Well, similarly here, there was James the Just, and when he was martyred, the story is that his brother, hence Jesus' brother, Simeon Bar Cleophas, he succeeded him. And the tradition said that both of these guys lived to the ripe old age of 120, I think it is, which is just a way to make them sound like Moses. But nonetheless, the notion that there was a succession like this it fits in with the idea that, okay, they didn't have actual power, but the Jesus community stayed together as a kind of possibly dangerous quasi-political movement. So yeah, there's the analogy, for one thing, of Islam that's a good argument. If you can show a similar phenomena, or the succession dispute after Joseph Smith was martyred, it's the kind of thing that happens after a prophet dies. So I think that's a pretty good argument from analogy. Not decisive though, and you have to though all of what I've just said is, I think, strong evidence, you then have to put against it all the arguments for mythicism. And those strike me as so powerful that virtually all the gospel narratives look like they were rewritten from the Old Testament. All the teaching and narrative contradictions, the similarities to dying and rising gods, and so forth. I really still side with mythicism, but I don't say it's an open and shut case, or that those who don't buy it are idiots or have something to hide. No, as with many of these things, are genuine scholarly debates.
Let's take a look at the next super chat. Fire Sabers, thank you for your super chat. Bill Darlison hypothesizes that Mark originally mirrored the Zodiac, and evidence that Mark has been heavily edited, noting the different lengths and number of Zodiac references per section. What are your thoughts on this?
Again, I have read a bit more about this, but it's so different. It's such a completely different paradigm than I'm used to. I don't know what I would do with either of the other bodies of evidence I just mentioned if this is true. It's like, and can you maintain some of this while believing that one version of Jesus worship was astro-theological? I mean, that's always a possibility. Or that, in one of the Pauline epistles, it says that some believe in another Jesus. It's not at all impossible that there are various Jesus groups that eventually clustered together when they were dying out and figured they'd, like small failing churches do, the congregations will merge. But I don't know. That really is, it doesn't seem unreasonable, but I wonder if that would ever have caught on as a popular cult or something. But I don't know. It's ingenious, quite clever. And Bill Darlison's, we had an essay of his in the anthology John Loftus and I edited, Varieties of Jesus Mythicism. Quite impressive. Just like a bunch of others. I say in the beginning of that book that are there very many inconsistent versions of the historical Jesus, so that it's hard to come up with one you agree with? Yeah, that's true. But you're not going to have much better luck with mythicism, because there's an even huger spectrum of very different mythicist theories, and this is one of them. So, all honor to Bill. I admire him and his work.
How much shorter do you think the Gospels would have been once you take out all the parts that are believed to be due to interpolation, redaction, etc.?
There probably wouldn't be much to them. In fact, you might almost say that's what you have in a couple of the Pauline epistles. Just the skeletal outline of God sent forth his son. He was crucified and rose from the dead, and we in baptism die and rise with him, and he's going to come back. It's kind of what Kierkegaard said was the minimum necessary gospel message. He said that's all we knew, that would be enough. And in a way, that's all you do have in the epistles, and whose ever Christianity was using those or produced those apparently didn't believe any more than that. And people began to spin it out with Q material, which may not even have been originally attributed to Jesus. No names would appear. It's just so and so said. So I doubt if there'd be much. I think generally they are fictitious and collections of, like, catch-alls, grab bags from all different religious traditions.
We got a super chat here. Constellation Pegasus again. Thank you for the super chat. Hey, Jacob, can you go to chabad.org and read the Exodus 4:24 Rashi commentary for everyone? The ending is pretty weird with what the angel does, swallowing Moses twice as a sort of serpent. Let me see. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. I'll try.
Wow. Moses as Jonah.
I think I see it. Okay, I think I'm there. Now he was on the way in an inn that the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. The next verse it says, so Zipporah took a sharp stone and severed her son's foreskin and cast it to his feet, and she said, we are a bridegroom with blood to me. And it keeps going. It says, so he released him, then said, a bridegroom with blood concerning the circumcision. The Lord said to Aaron, go toward Moses in the desert. So he went and met him on the Mount of God, and he kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord which he had sent him, and the signs that he had commanded him. So Moses and Aaron went, and they assembled all the elders of the children of Israel. And Aaron spoke the words of the Lord had spoken to Moses, and he performed the signs before the eyes of the peoples. And the people believed him, and they heard. Let me reread that. And the people believed, and they heard that the Lord had remembered the children of Israel. He saw their affliction, and they kneeled and prostrated themselves. This can't be it. There's no Moses getting swallowed by a serpent here.
There's something that rings a bell here. Like, I read some sort of connection recently. I don't know where that kind of this reminds me of.
Next time, Constellation, I recommend you provide the link in the super chat because or the live chat, because I'm not going to be able to. I don't know. It didn't say Rashi commentary Exodus. I don't know, but I think I'm going to end it here anyway. Well, thanks for joining me once again, Dr. Price. And I
My
thank
pleasure.
everybody for their massive support and super chats today. Today was
Yeah, pretty great.
all right, see you around, Bryce.
Okay, bye-bye.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.